Next, we will generate the component that will be responsible for showing or editing an individual contact record. So let's type ng generate component contact-detail. Then we press enter. Next, let's learn how to use the ng generate command to create Angular services. Service is encapsulation of methods and properties related to a certain type of activity. For example, if you're going to implement methods to help you with accessing a database, you could encapsulate methods to select, insert, update, and delete records into a service called database service. Once you have a service, you can use dependency injection to inject an instance of a service into the constructor of a component. In this tutorial, we need to implement a service to work with the contact records. To generate a new service, we use the ng generate service command. So we need to type ng generate service contact, and then we press enter. Two files were generated for the contact service: contact.service.spec.ts, contact.service.ts. We already established that spec.ts is the extension of the implementation of unit test methods. The file with the .ts extension is where we actually implement the service itself. We need to create a second service named in-memory database. This service will be used to provide fake contact records and avoiding the need to have an actual database. So we type ng generate service in-memory database, and then we press enter. Angular is similar to MVC. You can see the contact.ts as the model, the components as the views, and the service as the controller. Actually, depending on the version of Angular, there may be actual controllers. In order to determine where and when a component should be rendered on the page, we need a routing mechanism. Angular provides such mechanism as a module called app routing module. Let's generate the app routing module for our project. For that, we type ng generate module app-routing --flat --module equals app, and then we press enter. The flat switch puts the file in the src/app folder instead of its own folder. The module equals app tells the CLI to register it in the imports array of the app module. Now that we have finished generating the components, services, and modules that we need, we can return to Visual Studio Code so that we can resume the implementation of our Angular project. Earlier, I mentioned that we can define the style and formatting of each component by using the .css file generated for each component. However, if you want to apply some formatting at a global scope, you need to define your CSS classes in the style.css file at the root of the application. We're not going to go crazy into formatting our application, but let's apply some formatting so that we can see the style.css file in action. Let's click on the styles.css file. Let's go to the next step to see the code that we're going to type inside of the style.css file. As I mentioned, we don't want to go too crazy on spending too much time formatting our Angular application. But in this example, we should notice when we run the application that the background color of the application is set to yellow. For the next part of this tutorial, we will need to install a new npm package. Let's go back to the command prompt. Later in this tutorial, we will learn how to call REST Web API methods from Angular. This means we will need to implement or have access to a REST Web API service. Fortunately, Angular provides a package that simulates a REST Web API service. It is called in-memory Web API package. Type the following command to install the in-memory Web API package: npm install angular-in-memory-web-api-save. The --save switch instructs the npm install command to add the modules as dependencies inside the package.json file of the project. Starting with version 5.0.0 of the npm, adding the modules as dependencies is the default behavior. Press enter. Next, we're going to implement the in-memory database service. Let's go back to Visual Studio. Let's click on the in-memory database.service.ts. Let's go to the next step to see the code that we need to implement. We are making our in-memory database service class derived from the in-memory DB service class. Therefore, we need an import statement at the top for the in-memory DB service. Then we implement the createDB method. In our example, we wanted to return a list of contact records. To accomplish this, we make the createDB method return an array of contacts. Next, we're going to implement the contact service. Click on contact.service.ts. Let's go to the next step to see the code. This is not the complete implementation. You will need to go to the next step to see the rest of the code. However, let's go over some lines of code that we have implemented so far. In line 1, we import the injectable symbol so that we can make the contact service class available for dependency injection. In line 2, we import the two symbols that allow us to make HTTP requests and parse HTTP response. Line 4 and 5 are related to the RxJS library, which is beyond the scope of this tutorial. For now, all I'm going to say about the library is that its classes and symbols allow us to handle asynchronous calls in a much more organized and better performance. Line 7 imports our contact class that will be used throughout this application to encapsulate the properties about the contact record. Line 9 defines a constant that will be needed for all HTTP requests that we make. Line 19 defines a string variable that holds the relative path to the REST Web API service that we're going to call. The HTTP client object is dependency injected into the constructor so that we can use it throughout the code of the service. In line 24, we define the getContacts method, which will be used to asynchronously return a list of contacts. The .pipe, tap, and catch error are RxJS operators that allow us to execute code or handle uncaught exceptions once the collection is about to be completed. Line 32 defines the getContactNo404 method that will be used to handle errors. Notice that it is invoked by the catch errors. The .pipe, map, and tap RxJS operators allow us to intercept the elements of the collection. Let's go to the next step to see the rest of the implementation of the service. Here there are more lines of code that you need to implement in this service. The only thing missing is the handle error method, which is visible in the next step. But before we go to the next step, let's go over some of the code in this step of the tutorial. You probably got the idea behind the service. It contains methods that allow us to get list of contacts, create new contacts, modify information of existing contacts, delete contacts, and search for contacts. In other words, this is the service that gives us access to the data layer. Let's go to the next step to see the rest of the implementation. So, we're done with the implementation of the contact service. Next, we will implement the code required to provide a routing mechanism to display our components. Click on the app-routing.module.ts file. Go to the next step to see the code that we need to implement. This code imports the components that are going to be mapped to routing paths. The routes variable is an array containing the register routing paths for the application. We have registered 3 routes. One to determine what component to display when no relative path is appended to the URL. Another route to determine what component to load when the URL is appended with /contact_list. And a route path defining that the contact detail component should be loaded, passing the contact ID through the URL when the URL is appended with /contact_detail/:ID. However, it is not good enough if we just declare the routes array. We also need to make the application aware of the routing paths within the array. We do this through the use of the forRoute method. ForRoute is not the only option. For instance, there is also the forChild. However, forRoute makes sure a module with all the router providers and directives are created for the entire application. Next, we will install another npm module that will allow us to present a nice styled alert pop-up. This is better than using the JavaScript alert function. Let's go back to the command prompt. Let's type npm install angular-alert-module. By the way, this is the preferred method to add any modules to your Angular CLI project. For instance, if you are thinking of using Bootstrap, you can also install its module using the npm install command. Press enter. Next, let's implement the contact list component code.